Hi, I'm Doug, your tech support representative here at Atlantic British. And in this video, we're going to show you how to change over the air shock strut assemblies that you have on the LR3, the Sport, from 06 to 09. We're actually even 05 with the LR3s. As these vehicles are aging, these bags are starting to dry out and they're starting to develop minor leaks. You figure some of them looking at 05, we're going on 10 years old. So they're going to require some maintenance, some changeover. Now, you've probably heard of the coil spring changeovers that we have available, and they're very popular, but we have customers that also prefer the air ride, one of the reasons why they drive a Land Rover to begin with. So when you're ready to change over the bags, we want to give you an idea what's going to be involved. So to start with, I'm just going to show you some of the tools that I normally use when I'm going to take them off. Because of the tightness or the lack of space between the top of these units and the body of the vehicle, it's very hard to get a standard ratchet and a socket in there. It's almost impossible. So what I usually do, I like to use, this is a 15 millimeter with a ratcheting end. If you can find one like this with a swivel end, all the better. That'll give you a little bit mobility. This is good for breaking it loose, but you won't have much swing area. So then for now, from that point, you're going to use like a smaller wrench, and that gives you a little bit more swing on that. 12 millimeter for the airline connection. I usually use a 12 millimeter flare to break it loose, and then once it cracks loose, take it off with a regular open end. You'll need a 21 millimeter for the head of the bottom shock bolt, and a 15/16 deep socket for the nut. A little screwdriver to take the knurl off. We'll show you that in the process. And then a long-handled needle nose, which comes in very handy for plugging the airline back in when you're done. So the first thing first is, when you go to take these units off, the ideal thing is to have the system depressurized before you take it apart. Get the air pressure out of the bags. They can be bled on the vehicle, but it's generally not recommended. Now I'm going to show you, using our Hawkeye diagnostic tool, how you can access the air suspension system and actually deflate the bags prior to changing them over. Alright, so now we've got our Hawkeye plugged in, and like we've done in the past, we'll scroll this down to Range Rover Sport, hit our check mark. 06 to 09 model year. We'll hit our check mark, and we're going to be on the drive, we're using on the chassis. We'll hit that. Now these are all the different modules that the Hawkeye will view on chassis. You can look at ABS, steering angle, parking brake, tire pressure monitor. You're looking at your terrain control, and suspension is what we want. Now it's telling me make sure I'm plugging in and using the standard cable. The ignition on. Hit our check. Now read DTCs, clear DTCs, live data, configuration, and we're going to go to maintenance. And right there on the top, you're going to deflate the system. Now it's going to give you a little warning that when you're done with your service, that you need to re-enable the system to reinflate. It's going to tell you do this through the ECU control, and we'll keep scrolling through. Then you have your choices. You can either deflate just the airbags, you can deflate the reservoir, or you can deflate all. This tells you how you can exit your deflate mode. Usually what I do, I just do all. You can just do the springs if you want. Being that's all we're working on, we're going to hit that. And they're going to tell you that this should only be done by trained personnel. And we check it off. Ignition is on. And check to start. So right now what it does, it opens up the valves to the system that will end up draining all the air pressure out of the airbags. And the biggest issue with that is not that when you unbolt it, it's going to come apart, but that when you go to pull the line, you're not quickly exiting 150 pounds of pressure, which could actually be dangerous and blow something in your eye. I suggest wearing safety glasses anyway, but at least you're not dealing with all that air pressure. The system will pretty much be totally deflated when you're done. So this takes about 2 minutes, and then this will be done, and then we can get in with our disassembly and our replacement of our air springs. Okay, so we've deflated the airbags. We no longer have any heavy air pressure built up in here. Relatively safe to remove, and actually relatively easy to remove. The only reason that it's tight at all, the way they have these built, you have very little space between the top of this air strut and the inner fender well. And even if you remove it, there are basically heat shields above it, so you still wouldn't be able to access it. So pretty much power tools are out of the question there, so we're going to have to take these off by hand. So that's the reason why I like to start with the long bolt. This gives you some leverage to break them loose. Now, the other hint you might want to do is shoot these up with penetrating oil the day before you're thinking about changing them, and then about half an hour to 15 minutes before you're ready to take them out, shoot them up one more time. If you use a good penetrating oil like PB Blaster or anything in that line, they will do the job. Take a little bit of effort, but for the most part, these generally aren't too bad. That one backed right off. And that's all we're basically going to use the long tool for, is just to get them backed off from their initial torque. Now the toughest one is the one bolt all the way in the back. And that's going to mainly be done by feel. I'm going to basically just get that wrench on there. And unfortunately, this front stud sits right in the way. You might be able to just break it loose. Alright, so once you break them loose, then we go to the shorter wrench, which is nice as you have a little 15-degree angle on here. Now, there are also some available out there that actually have a swivel head, which will give you more range of movement. Usually with this end down, and you can even sneak on that back bolt with it. Now, you can't travel very far, but if you've pre-soaked it enough, that nut will come off, and it's going to be tedious, and it's going to take you a little while longer than you think it should, but it will come out of there. Once you got the back nut off, the two fronts are relatively easy, and then from there it's just a matter of taking that bottom bolt off. And the bottom bolt, you're going to use a 21mm wrench on the head of the bolt and a 15/16 socket on the nut. If you have access to an air tool, an impact gun will zip that right off. If not, just use a long breaker bar and that should come off. Alright, so we've taken the nut off the bottom bolt. We've got the three nuts out of the top. Now we're taking consideration, we still have the airline hooked up, and for a reason is because you can't get at it when the strut is up in this position. They basically have it hidden below this upper mount, so putting a wrench on it is almost impossible. So we're going to very carefully lower this down a little bit and let the line feed through. Let's see if we can turn that just a little bit. And then here's where you're going to put your 12mm wrench on that, break that loose, and then spin off the brass nut that holds the line on the top of the shock. Alright, so we've taken the airline down, and I'm going to tell you, be careful, hold on to this strut, because once that airline is disconnected, the strut's going to want to drop. You can probably put a wooden brace or something under there if you want to hold it up in place just while you're taking that off. It probably would be safer. But now that we've got the line off, basically the strut is ready to come out. We're just going to basically let it drop in through the control arm a little bit, tilt it back and lift up. We're going to take that right out of there. But what I want to show you is the airline right here. On the end of it has a little brass knurl, and then above that the nut that locks it all into the top of the air strut. Now you're going to get a new nut and a new knurl that are already going to be installed into the new strut. What you can do is you can leave that right in the strut, and that just is going to make, when you go to reinstall the airline, it's just going to be a push-in deal. But we've got to remove this small knurl, and you'll see if you can spin it with your fingers where it's split. We're going to take a small screwdriver, put it in that split, spread the knurl by twisting the screwdriver, drop the knurl off, take the nut off, and that line is ready to reinstall. Alright, so as I was saying, so you get the new nut, and the knurl is already installed down inside. We're just going to take that little white insert right out of there. So you're going to orient this so that it goes back in the way it came out, so that that nut is going to be on the left side rear. We'll drop this down inside here. Set that up there. Now, more than likely what's going to happen, we're going to put the bolt in, and the shock is probably going to be just a little bit short of actually going into the holes at the top of the mount. So we may need to put a jack stand or a floor jack or whatnot underneath the lower control arm, we'll set the vehicle down, and then we can just lift the control arm to push the strut right in place. So, take our bolt. So as you can see, we're a little bit short, so we're going to put a jack stand, or in this case we have a barrel with a wood piece across it, and we can lower the lift on it and slide that right in place. Popped right in. So we've got the top two nuts on the outside, the easy ones to get at, are in place. Now you'll find that on the Sports, on this left side, there's a small flat bracket that the right side and the rear nut run through. It holds the bracket down, which helps support one of the heat shields. So make sure that you put that bracket back over these two studs before you put the nuts on, so that it holds it in place. Otherwise, it's not going to cause any damage, but you'll end up with a rattle under there from the loose heat shield. So now we got the two in place. We're going to snug them in a little better, and then we can pick this up and finish bolting it in. Alright, so top of the shock is bolted in. We got the bottom bolt in loose. So basically the strut is in place. Now what we have to do is get that air line, and we've got to line it up and get it into that little brass fitting, which is sort of in the back. And this is mostly done by feel. And this is where the long needle nose pliers comes into effect, because once we get it on there, you're going to need something like that to be able to reach in deep enough and push down on that airline so that it seats. And that's essentially all we're going to do at this point. We need to do, see if we can dig that airline up. I guess this is going to come in handier than I thought. Okay, here's our airline. As I said, it's awful tight under the hood. I need to angle this back a little bit so we can get it in the hole. So we've lined up the airline, we've pushed it down in place. Now as a note, you'll see a little bulge in that airline about an inch from the very end. That's basically your stop point. So you're going to line that up, take those long needle nose, wiggle it down, and you should be able to just snap it down into place. Once it's all the way in, take the pliers, give a little tug upward. Doesn't take a lot of force. If it feels like it's in good and firm and it's not moving, you're in. You have a new O-ring in there, so your seal should be good. And as long as that bulb is sitting just about on the top of that nut, you should be good. We'll put the bottom nut on the bottom bolt, and essentially the front struts have been installed. So now that we have the front end, we're going to install the rear. Now I'm not going to show you the whole process, only because it's exactly the same as the front. You're going to take your three nuts off the top. You're going to take your bottom bolt out, and then you're going to lower this down to where you have room enough to get in. You can take the nut off for the airline and slide that out of place. Once you've done that, essentially the strut is out. You're going to lower the strut, bring it forward and out, exactly like you've done the front. So once you do your installation on your rear, you put those back in place, which we're going to do now. When we're all said and done, we're going to re-enable the system with the Hawkeye, and then you'll have to do a height calibration. If you don't have the equipment to do so, you'll probably have to take it to a dealer. But anytime you change height sensors or the airbags, you definitely want a height calibration done on the system. Alright, so we have all four air shocks in place. Airlines are plugged in, everything's torqued up. So now what we need to do before we can do a calibration is to be able to restore the air suspension system, which means we've got to re-enable it. If you remember earlier, we had run it through on the Hawkeye, disable the system. So from now, we're going to go to Range Rover Sport, model year 06 to 09, drop the chassis, scroll down to suspension. Again, making sure it's telling me what cable I have to have plugged in. This is just the regular DLC cable that comes with the Hawkeye. Ignition on. Then we drop back down to maintenance. Exit deflate mode. Again, just the warnings about this being done by trained personnel. We'll press to continue. We've ensured ignition on, and press to start. This will go through a 10-second relearn. And procedure complete. So at this point, what we'll do is we'll start the vehicle. We got to let those airbags fill up. Let the system hit its. We're going to go to regular height. And then from there, we'll have to do a calibration. Now, you cannot do a height calibration using the Hawkeye. What you would need is basically a Land Rover specific analyzer like an Autologic, or would have to be taken to a dealer so that they can hook it up to an SDD or their current diagnostic tool and make sure that calibration is set right. Once that's done, that should improve the ride greatly on your vehicle. So if you opt and you want to replace the airbag and suspension in your Range Rover Sport, this is also the same application. As far as the installation would be for the LR3 and LR4. Just call any of our knowledgeable salesmen at 1-800-533-2210. And thanks for watching.